Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
And on today's episode, we are very excited to have Cameron Laws with us. Welcome, Cameron.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored that y'all thought of me for this podcast. I love it.
Yes, we are so excited. There will be a lot of things that we're discussing, including how you got started in the arts nonprofit, your current role as the creative director of Artsplosure and its namesake event, as well as recording a bonus segment with advice for keeping track of opportunities for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
And before we dive in, we want to share a little bit more about your background with our listeners who may not be familiar with you and the nonprofit that you work with or the event, especially if they're from out of town. So let's get started. Cameron Laws is a lover and maker of art and music, a North Carolina native and proud daughter of rural agricultural county. A current Raleigh resident, Cameron serves as the creative director for Artsplosure. In this role, she's responsible for artistic program planning and coordination, supervising technical and volunteer staff, and assisting in coordinating logistics of all on-site festival operations for each festival. She also assists the executive director in securing proposals for major visual art installations and in preparing and negotiating artist contracts. Her role with Artsplosure is a continuation of her involvement with the North Carolina arts community. Some of her previous roles include student coordinator for the First Arts Village, member of Arts NC State, and intern at the Gregg Museum of Art and Design, right behind Fulham, really cool space. Cameron is also an active volunteer with Girls Rock North Carolina, teaching youth to play guitar and perform original compositions, and producing art and design work. Oh, I went ahead of myself. And your hobbies include exploring the triangle scene, writing songs, playing guitar, production art and design work through multiple artistic mediums. If you were to take a look at Cameron's Instagram, you'll see it's a little bit of everything from chain stitching to painted logos, calendars, music video collabs, of course, big art events. So we are very excited to talk to such a multi-talented creative with us on the podcast today.
And of course, that is a lengthy introduction of you and all of your experience that we're so excited to dive into. But real quick, also for people who may not be familiar with Artsplosure specifically, Artsplosure is a nonprofit organization that focuses on producing art and cultural events. And since its first festival back in April 1980, Artsplosure has presented scores of outdoor programs, large-scale festivals featuring thousands of established and emerging visual, performing, and interdisciplinary artists in numerous traditional and non-traditional indoor and outdoor venues. So, of course, the whole range of experience of Artsplosure events and yourself is far-reaching. But do you have anything that you would add to that list of experience, Cameron?
I think that about covers it. Yeah, I think you guys got it. You clearly did your research.
You've worn a lot of hats, which is amazing, of course. And as we dive into this, one thing that I'm curious about is growing up, did you always know you wanted to be involved in the arts?
I would say yes. I think I did. As you mentioned, I grew up in a rural county. I'm from Harnett County originally. And so we would go to Raleigh for a lot of our cultural experiences. And my parents are both art lovers. And so we went to the North Carolina Art Museum all the time and had a lot of original art in our house, or we were the people that would always get like the poster from the art show. So we had a lot of those where it was like Matisse, Raleigh Art Museum on these dates. But it really has been, I would say art has been the most consistent feature of my life in one way or another, kind of from the start. And that was both from that parental encouragement, but then also just I don't have to explain it to y'all. It's like when you can't help but do it. When it's something inside you that like you must make something, that's you just kind of have that, or you don't, I guess. And I have always had it.
Has it always been visual and musical?
That's a good question. I guess I would say it was visual first, and then I got a guitar, I think in middle school maybe. And I got a banjo. This is Circo when the Avett Brothers were just like a small local band.
Oh, yeah.
the first bands that really made me proud of, being from North Carolina and all of that. And God, now they're huge. But yeah, so it was visual first, but music has always been a love of mine, whether it was just going to concerts when I was younger or figuring out guitar on YouTube.
I love that. And that's definitely, I think, a theme that's common with many of the creatives we've had on the podcast lately is it's naturally being a creative person, needing to put things out in the world. It's just a matter of finding which medium is correct for whatever you need to do. It may be writing, it may be music, it may be visual art, it may be poetry, like all these different things, and the conversation of the parental support. So
Mhm.
it's amazing to hear that that was something that was encouraged for you because that can be such a big, maybe it's not something that people realize right away, but it's a pivot point in your creative journey if it's maybe encouraged or discouraged early on. Hopefully, eventually within your creative time, even if it is discouraged early on, you kind of have some type of outlet. But it's great to hear that that was encouraged in your household for sure.
Oh, for
Mhm.
sure. And it's I think it's too, and maybe y'all can relate to this. I really enjoy figuring out how to do things. And then
Mm.
once I really figure it out, it gets kind of boring sometimes. And so then it's like on to the next thing, which is maybe also a feature of ADHD, but it is what it is.
I think it's one of those things as a creative too of constantly being a beginner again. Like once you have it as a set system and it's rinse repeat, that can bring comfort to an extent, but also you're like, now this is just rinse repeat. So I need to be a beginner again and get in there and do the research and start
Mhm.
from scratch and see what happens, which actually leads in perfectly to your start at Artsplosure. How did that opportunity come about? How did you get that opportunity? And what was the role that really like got your foot in the door for that position as now creative director?
This just is depends on how far back we want to go. But I'm gonna take us back just briefly.
Let's go. We're ready.
Because the larger answer is that um basically most of my either college roles or careers after college, they've all been within the arts, and in that way it, whether you realize you're doing it or not, it's kind of queuing you up to find yourself aware of opportunities like Artsplosure. But it's actually, to really paint a picture of how much art has always been a part of my life. I sat beside someone in my 10th grade art class that became one of my best friends. Her name's Crosby Lufton. And she was an intern first at Artsplosure, I think, and then she ended up working here. And she is now a headhunter, so she was always good at this. So she would send the job listings to anybody that she thought was appropriate. And I actually applied for this job as the marketing director twice, and I got it on the second time that they were hiring. So she is partially responsible, at least for me knowing that it was a job opening to begin with, and for encouraging me to apply a second time, even though I didn't get it the first. And but other than that, it really was like once I did get that interview, if you really stick to different artistic roles in the community, it becomes a thing where it's like, oh yeah, I worked at Arts NC State with Sharon. Oh, you know Sharon, that's great. And you're familiar with the Gregg Museum, and we know all these similar people. And if you're doing a good job, those people will vouch for you. And that's the short and long answer of kind of how I ended up here. And um just different elements of fate have happened. Our amazing program director Terry retired, and she was really amazing at letting me help her with programming, even when I was the marketing director. So I just kind of sideways shifted into that, and here we are.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those networking things where, especially in college, everyone tells you like it's all about who you know. Like, yes, you have to have the foundation in the industry, but that's where those like little nuanced networking things that you don't even think of as formal networking come into play. As someone who went to school for an art degree and kind of collecting experiences, like you were saying, having every role, it either teaches you what you want to do and helps you develop a skill, or debatably more valuably, teaches you what you don't want to do through an internship or a summer work program or something of learning all those different skills. But that's also part of networking, especially if you're all local. Of one of my internships I did was actually at the Museum with Sharon. So I'm like, yep, I know Sharon. Great. If we were on an interview, that'd be a perfect segue. And
Oh
so
my
it's all
God.
those little things.
I was at the Greg when it was still in the student center. So this was before they got the incredible space that they have now.
Yeah, I was there when they were in transition. So I was
Oh,
actually in the warehouse cataloging a series of 1800 butter molds and jello molds that they had. Very long story, but
What?
I
Wow.
love inventory and structure and creating databases. It was so much fun. I'm like, the type A of me was just thriving. And then I moved here 2 years after that. There's this beautiful museum with natural light. And I'm like, I was in the brick building, like warehouse, didn't see sunlight. What's going on?
Well, and honestly, the old space was pretty similar. So yeah, I know. The first time I went there, I was like, this is fantastic, and I'm so happy, and I wish that I'd been an intern in this space.
Yeah, but it's so much about developing those skills too. And you don't know in hindsight how all of those skills are going to lead to each other. Like I thought it was a cool short-term project, great experience, build relationships. But now being a professional artist and having to track inventory and what information is important. And it's all those things where each job kind of cues you up for now your position at Artsplosure, which is awesome.
For sure, and that's because I'm like I hate networking. Like you're not going to catch me at a networking event ever. But if you're really true to your interests and you really put that effort into just things that you sincerely love, you will meet like-minded people, and those people not only become connections for you, but they also can be tastemakers for you. Because in a role like mine, this cannot be like the Cameron show. It can't be Cameron's taste. So I've I've hired plenty of bands that I don't listen to because they're not my thing, but people that I've met that are interested in, let's say, that genre can kind of guide me in the direction of saying there is a community that's going to love this, and that's kind of the whole point of my job. So it's that the I guess I'll call it natural networking. Really, in a town like Raleigh, where it's big and small at the same time, it's such a wonderful way to kind of like make decisions and build things. Because, well, I guess Adriana, I can't remember. We met in Jane's studio.
Uh-huh.
And
years ago.
Artwork, and I like had it up here, and then an opportunity came around. I was like, hit up Adriana, who I just happened to meet, you know. So it's not at a formal networking thing. It's just like finds like, you know.
And like you said, well, and this is something that keeps popping up even more commonly in a lot of the recent podcast interviews we've been doing. It is about who you know.
Mhm.
And if you're passionate and authentic about what you do, people resonate with that. And like you said, if you're in a position or in especially like nonprofits where you're like, actually, I know of this thing and this person, and how about this other person? And wait, what if they did a team and they could do a group show or this other collaboration? I don't know. You're in a fun place where it's not just, like you said, it's not Cameron's show, but it is Cameron who knows other people. It's almost like if you don't know who, you'll know someone who knows who.
Yes.
Almost. I don't know. That sounds confusing, but I love that idea. It's not like we've spoken to gallerists before, right? And it is about their taste.
Mhm.
But in this case, you're literally almost crowdsourcing some of this
Yeah.
information to make the best events, the best decisions. It's not just the one person thing. So I don't know. I like that collaboration element to it. It's not just networking for yourself. There's there's a greater there's a greater plan behind it. But with that, I'm really curious, without us going back down to the type A/admin rabbit hole, which can happen when talking to someone who works in art administration. But I do want to ask you, what does a typical day or week look like for you as a creative director? I know, I'm sure when the festival's going, it's a whole nother bag of chips, but outside of festival season, what does it normally look like?
Outside of festival season, it looks like an absolutely unhinged inbox that I can never ever get fully under control. That's what it looks like. I mean, and let me use this public platform to say, if you have ever emailed me and I've not gotten back to you, or I've gotten back to you like 2 weeks later, it is not personal. I love you. I just am constantly excavating the inbox that is my Artsplosure email.
We'll extract that as a clip so you can just post it on your Instagram every month. Just be like, PSA, PSA.
Highlight on your yeah.
Also included. Yeah, it's that is what is such an interesting part of this job is 90% of it is intangible until the festival, because it's planning and ideating and talking to people, and it's all over email. And yesterday I spent like 6 hours on my email, and by the time I got it, I started at 130, and after 6 hours it was up to 134. And I was like, well, no, that's not.
Oh
Right?
no.
You get one red, but then it comes back because you asked a question, and it just, yeah, there's only 4 of us here, so we all wear a lot of hats. And yeah, that's my answer. It just looks like emailing constantly and constantly starting
Mhm.
emails with, "Thank you so much for your patience." When I want to say, "I'm sorry, I'm a mess, but I love your work."
That is hilarious. I completely understand because inbox zero, I don't think I've ever had inbox zero except when I start a new job. There you go. And then even then I teach sending you like 16 emails for starting. So, and then your manager sends you another 10. So there you go. Never starts at zero, but that's okay. It's okay. Or when you start a new email, I guess. But with that, okay. So all right. So a lot of it is email, right? And then I know when we spoke on your bio, a lot of it had to do with artist contracts, which I'm familiar with that part. Hello.
Mhm.
Um, Tell me what else, like what other I know it's not here's the other interesting thing. So in your role within an arts nonprofit, you also collaborate with other nonprofits, don't you?
For sure. Yeah, that's well, other
So
nonprofits,
true.
other businesses, like you know this. But the other part, like the part of my job that I love the most is when it's a work day where we're actually building something or working on something and we're kind of out in the field, I guess is what you would call it. Just last Friday, I guess it was, we're working on a giant 40-foot mural for Dreamville, and there's 3 individual artists as part of this mural. But the timelines are always really short. And the long story short on it is that every artist that Dreamville selected was in Charlotte, and we were about to have to ask them to drive to Raleigh twice in like 2 weeks to get the panels they were painting and then to deliver them painted. And so a day I love is like prepping all of those panels and making sure they're really ready to go for the artist. But then I was just like, I cannot ask these artists to do this twice for the fee that Dreamville gave us. So we just drove to Charlotte on a Friday and dropped them all off at individual artists' houses. And I love that because it's active, it's not in front of the computer, and it's also just like making things a little bit easier for the artist and trying to kind of do right by them. And so that's checking a lot of really, really good boxes for me.
Absolutely. And that goes a long way too, both from the like artist relationship standpoint, because the little things like that go a long way in the arts community. Like the word spreads, which is of course not the reason you did it, but it helps. And also, like you said too, getting out on a Friday afternoon, taking a field trip and going down to a new city, dropping them off. It's also, I'm sure, getting good quality conversation in the car while you're going too
Oh
is
yeah, we had a great
helpful.
time.
Some out of the office conversation.
But you are right about the sort of reputation, I guess. And the thing that's sort of unique about Artsplosure is we are a nonprofit. So I've written a million emails that start with, I absolutely know you're worth more than this, but we run a free
Mm,
festival. This is what I've got. Like, it would be more if it could be more. And so where I can't close that gap with money, I mean, Artsplosure pays everyone. What something I'm really proud of is even if it's sort of an honorarium, we don't do that exposure nonsense. We
yeah,
don't do that. Everyone gets paid, but everyone gets paid with the amount you would expect a nonprofit to have. So I do try to close that gap with like service and trying to be considerate and making things easier because I realize that an artist is already doing us a favor by taking a gig at not commercial rate.
definitely. And I think that's so powerful to be aware of too. And like you said, goes a long way within the arts community from one artist to another.
Mhm.
So what advice would you have for artists who want to get involved and pursue a art adjacent career, whether in arts administration or any other role that they may have in a nonprofit, commercial, etc.?
I guess we've talked about this a little already, but I would just really say that if you love it, do it and just find a way to stay involved, whether that is as a job, whether it's volunteering. Because another part of my Artsplosure journey is I took the 5 a.m. volunteer shift once because that was artist check in. And when I interviewed for the second time, they were like, "You did that 5 a.m. shift, didn't you? That was you. That's really impressive." And so I would just say, like, stay involved in your art community, do what you love. Every job I've ever taken that happened to be in the arts, I was not doing with this grand plan in mind. I was doing it because it made me happy. And and I liked it. And that will pay off in one way or another. So that would be my advice: is stay engaged, do what you love. It'll all work out.
Yeah, I love that. Now in your current role, or maybe even as you moved into your current role, what has been your favorite project to work on? Whether it's collabing with another nonprofit or just something that you got to stand, at the top of the helm, top of that ship, but was like your favorite project?
Oh wow, that's an impossible question. The way my mind went blank and then thought of 30 things simultaneously. Favorite project? We've done so many. I don't think I can pick a favorite, but I will say my favorite type of project is when Dreamville's a great example. When someone comes to us and they say, we're coming from out of town, but it's important to us that we involve the creative community. And then we, as an organization, are able to give an artist an opportunity and be able to showcase our creative community at an event like that. That's my favorite. I love those. And so we've done so many versions of that with different partners. And I think part of this, our old executive director, Michael Lauder, always said that the thing that everyone here had in common was that we loved making tangible things. And that the reason we could do these festivals over and over is because all of this intangible emailing and planning becomes this thing that you can see and hold, and you can see people enjoying everything that you spent all this time organizing. And yeah, it really never gets old, whether it's a festival or a project like I just described. But I don't think I could pick a favorite. I just can't do it.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, and sometimes like I find like there's parallels with those that do visual art, at least painting specifically. Actually, even ceramics, I find there's parallels with that too. That idea of you're bringing something to life that you didn't see before, or that sometimes it's even hard to articulate before it exists. So
Yeah.
it's like you're doing all these hours, all these meetings, all these preparations, all these like, okay, how's the food? The person that's doing the cleanup, where are the porta johns, like there's
Oh
so much
God.
that goes on, but it's until you put all the pieces together, much like a painting, much like even ceramics, it's only until that final thing comes out and you just get to go, it's done, then you can look back and be like, okay. And then I guess it's that experience over and over that then helps you with the next one, because you're basically training yourself. Think of it too, like engineers probably find a parallel with this, or even folks that do software, like programming. They're making things that don't exist out of nothing
Yeah.
in many ways, and then trusting through the process, it will work out somehow. I don't know.
And it
I
is
love
Yeah.
that. I love that.
And I
yeah.
think that's so true. I feel like a lot of the collectors of my work are all engineers, programmers. They're like, I don't get art. And you're like, what are you talking about? You literally create an idea and then make it come to life. They're like, oh, I guess I
Uh-huh.
never thought of it that way. I'm like, you're literally building something from
Oh,
like a blank piece of land. It's
and
not visual art, but it's, yeah.
but it is art. I mean, and what I love about, even like, well, I always say, so a different hobby of mine that isn't necessarily the arts is I love cars, and I have a project car and I'm always working on it, and it's like a old Italian car, and like Italian automobiles are very design forward, and they care about as about what it looks like as much as if it actually works. I have found, but it's even with like under the hood of a car, there's so much artistry in that, and it's practical artistry because it not only has to fulfill a purpose, but there are so many people working on that and figuring that out, and then often they'll still add an element that makes it look nice. The top of my engine has Alfa Romeo and like cursive beautiful letters, and so whether it's engineering or mechanics, I think that is art. And it's art plus a true practicality. And I love practical things. So I think a lot of people uh, do themselves a disservice saying that they don't get art because they're an engineer or something, because you could argue that's what they're doing all day.
Yeah, it could just be basic. It could just be, I don't know, Volkswagen Beetle from back in the day. Even that can be beautiful. Even though it's as utilitarian as it gets and basic. But no, I love that idea. That's also why, and we're not going to start the Apple versus Android war now, but I do have to mention almost anybody, even if they don't like Apple, will mention the sleek look and packaging of Apple products. It stands out, even though it does the same as the Google Pixel or any of the other competitors. it has
Mhm.
that extra little je ne sais quoi that people go like, "Ooh,"
Works.
the wrapping, the colors, the smooth, sexy lines. Just like, I mean, they do it right. They do it just like nice luxury cars, where it has that extra detail that it doesn't have to have, but then it appeals to you emotionally somehow. Like, you talking about your car, that's what it's reminding me of. It's that little extra little something that just that's where the artistry is. That's where the artists come in. That's where, some of the building guys will do the inside and it doesn't matter, most of it you won't even see, only a mechanic will see it. But then somebody goes, "Oh no, I have to sketch it on this like architectural paper, and then the wind goes like this, and then the lines." And I don't know. Anyways, I'm going down that rabbit hole. I like cars too,
I'm
but
with you yeah, but I mean, even in like the practical, I'm a big advocate of trades and trade schools and things like that. And I'm also a big historic preservation advocate. I actually just joined the Durham Preservation Durham, and sometimes when you go into these houses and you take the sheetrock down and you see the carpentry that someone did that then got covered up, like, but they've created an arch with square pieces of wood, and you're like, this was an artist. An artist
Mhm.
did this, and then you cover it up, and it does look great in its final form. But yeah, I'm just fascinated by people that have kind of a different version of what we would consider artistic talent, and it just short circuits my brain to think about it because it's so cool.
Love it. Love it. All right, so we've dove into some of your day to day, some of the projects, and of course, all the hats you wear. I do want to dive a little bit more into, of course, the namesake event, Artsplosure. I think this is, at least for me, this is how you were introduced to me by Jane, our friend Jane, who was our first artist interview ever, by the way, back in episode 18, and we're over 100 now, so that was a while ago. Yeah, I know, right? Love your face. That's perfect expression.
Wow.
Every week, baby, every week. But like back then, when we were introduced, it was like, "Oh, this is Cameron, works at Artsplosure, and Exposure does that big festival." And then with other artists being at Art Space, it's great because we get to talk. And they're like, "Oh yeah, I did Artsplosure, and this is what you can expect. This is how long it was. This is how long it is now. All those kind of things." But I do want to give people. I know we kind of introduced it earlier, but I want to give people a different sense of it. So could you briefly describe in your own words Artsplosure, the Raleigh Arts Festival, which I believe is taking place May 20 and 21st. So yeah.
You got it. That's exactly what it's taking place. So Artsplosure, I mean, I guess if I had to pick like three words for Artsplosure, the festival, it is one that I think it's the oldest art free arts festival in the city. Um, and it is also accessible financially and otherwise for our community to come to because it is free. And while being free, we also really make sure that it is high quality. So something that's important to me, again, as someone that's from a rural background and knowing that Raleigh has a very diverse economic reality of people that live here, and that a lot of the people at the bottom of that economic reality are the people that make this city function. It's really important to me that if we're doing this free festival, it's that it's of the quality that a high priced ticket festival would be. So we bring in Grammy winners. We bring in people that you are going to have to buy that $300 festival ticket to see them in concert. We bring all of this high quality visual and performing arts to Raleigh, and we work really hard to make sure that it's always free. And so that's, if you come to Artsplosure, what I can promise you're going to see is something that the next time you have the opportunity to see it, you're going to need to pay for it because that's how it is. I mean, we've had so many people that have gone on to great things, and so that's why we also, I guess, describe ourselves as a discovery festival. We had Esperanza Spalding before anybody knew who that was. We had Tank and the Bangas, like the year that they then played every single $300 a ticket festival. And we're always trying to do that. And then if you're familiar with the art market, we get over 400 applications for that art market from across the country and have to narrow it down to 175 with the help of juries. So it's really quality. That's what it is. It's also something you can just walk right into because it's free.
I love that. And
Okay.
if anyone is in downtown Raleigh during previous Artsplosures, you really can't miss it. It's definitely, I feel like, an experience that takes over downtown in the best possible way, having, as you said, booths set up, music, food trucks, amazing ice cream from local shops. So it's definitely a long and hopefully not super, super hot, even though it is in May. The weather's always a huge factor of events.
Absolutely. Yeah, if there's ever anything that's like big and weird and pretty in City Plaza, it's probably because it's Artsplosure Festival. Last year we had the bubbles and those were amazing. We actually, so that's a great example. We imported those from Australia and
Yeah.
only been at these kind of big paid festivals, mostly in either Europe or Australia in that general area. And I know more about tariffs and freight and customs than I ever wanted to know. But
Again, just adding skills to that tool belt of things you're like, I didn't think I'd have to do this, but I guess this is a skill I'm getting.
yeah, but it was like we brought that from Australia, and then we're like, here you go, everybody. Like, isn't this great? But it's also free, and that's just such a satisfying thing to do.
No, I love it too because I think Arts Exposure is also one of the few shows in our area
Mhm.
where you don't have to pay to go in, but the quality is really high. So for those artists who are looking to do art fairs, it's a great example of what does it doesn't have to be a fancy setup like some of those expensive indoor shows because it is outdoors after all.
Yeah.
But, like, at least for me, it was the first time that I was seeing and this was, like, several years back, pre-pandemic, 500 years ago, of course. Anything pre-pandemic is 500 years ago. But it was the first time that I was seeing some artists a lot of them were coming from out of town, so this was, like, circa 2017, 18, that were doing the nice covered walls that have the upholstery on them with the benches and, like, the little racks that are not the normal folding racks, they're, like, squares that you know, kinda look at prints on and also seeing artists kind of like the range was so wide that I hadn't seen it because either like other markets either were more fine craft with a little bit of fine art in them or just fine art but very hoity-toity, if you will, versus this one had a good variety of no, I can still buy a sticker and a bonsai and a print and this like pot thing that I still have to put my plants in that has, like, little handmade, like, mushrooms hanging off the side of it. I don't know, it was really cool. Ceramic planter thingamajigger fountain thing. I don't know, I can't describe it now. But, it was like one and also, like, some paintings that were like, "Wait, this is an outdoor market and that painting's $5,000? And it says sold in a booth and it says outdoors. What? Anyways, so it was I feel like for a lot of artists, it's a good playground for research, as well as networking. Obviously, not the sort that you want to stand around and you know keep the folks from selling what they need to sell. You know, just little PSA in there for her fellow friends. But it was definitely good to be like meeting the person, especially so I've met some artists that I only knew through the internet and suddenly now and they don't have a public facing studio. So this was the first time I was meeting them in person, exchanging cards, following up with coffee later. So that was awesome. Again, this is like earlier on, emerging, you know, side of things. But it was a great experience and the music, the venues. Oh, there's that tent that's what is it, the Pottery Guild? The
Mhm.
Pottery Guild. There's that giant tent, so there's so many ceramic artists under one tent. So that was also really, really cool to see all the styles. Anyways,
That's
can y'all tell? I love it. It's a really, really
well,
cool event. It's a really
that
cool
and that
event.
is
There's
so
music too, and food and
cool
beer
to
and all the
hear
things.
that that's really interesting to hear that from a working artist that it's inspiring to see the setups because you are right. People go so hard on these booth setups. And they're loading in at 5 a.m. and they're
Mhm.
building elaborate booth setups. And I respect all of our exhibiting artists so much because what you don't see when you just roll up and you're in this beautiful booth and having honestly like a proper experience in a booth that wasn't there 6 hours ago, you don't see the setup of that and that these pottery artists that you're talking about are painstakingly taking individual bubble wrap pieces that they've brought with them from states away
Mhm.
and they're putting them on these shelves and it is just it's epic. It is an epic thing and we are just really fortunate to have a good reputation in that community of exhibiting artists and our art market coordinator Hannah Liebel is certainly to thank for a lot of that. But that's really cool to hear that. I've actually never heard anyone say that and never really thought about it. But that's certainly the art market's the heart of our event at the end of the day.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you dig it.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And as Adriana touched on, but for our listeners, especially if you are an established artist or emerging, big events like this, or really any art market, but especially at this scale, it's such a great place to go for networking and research. Of course, being respectful of the artists at the booth time, but gathering cards, follow them on Instagram, see what other events are they doing in your local area or around, reach out to the ones you feel connected to, but also taking note about, okay, shop setups, how many people are using this kind of setup? If someone makes similar work to you, how do they display their pieces? It's like going in really as a sponge. I remember the first year I went to Artsplosure, I went with a few friends, and they of course were going like to multiple booths, and I had gone to like two in the time they had gone to like 10, because you're just like soaking everything up, talking to people, and they're like, oh wait, you're like working right now. And I'm like, kind of. It's like you're at like an industry conference for
Totally.
your field. Like if you were an engineer going and seeing all the suppliers, all the designers, you're like, oh, this is the big celebration of all of the big and small artists that applied and got into the show. And now this is like their celebration for the weekend. Which is
And that is what's cool about it is it's always really high quality. But to tell you a little more than you want to know, we do a blind jury for all of those Artsplosure applications. So you might just be incredibly talented and you've never done this before, but you submit your photos like everyone else, and we don't know who you are. All we know is what you've made, and so we select a new jury every year. Basically, and typically the formula for that is sort of one practicing artist, someone in the educational field, and then someone in more of like a curatorial, maybe gallery kind of background, something like that. But it kind of is an equal playing field in that way, because we don't, all we know is your art. So, but that also means that it changes every year. So there may be someone that's been to the last 6 Artsplosures, and then this year just with a different jury. That's not how it goes. But it keeps it fresh and it keeps it fair. And the fair part is really important to me.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And that was actually going to be one of our next questions of if you have any tips for artists that are applying for the first time. Of course, if the jury's different every year, maybe you have to act like it's your first time every year. But what would you have advice wise for artists that are applying to be an artist at Artsplosure?
Oh, I wish Hannah was here to answer this. I would love to hear what she would say. Well, what I would say, and this is going to seem a little counterintuitive because this is a blind jury, but I would say if you're an artist applying, to really just lean in to being authentic, and just make art from the place that you can truly claim. And because whatever your background is, whatever context your art is coming from, everything that you've ever experienced that makes your art what it is, that is something that no one else is going to have. You cannot replicate it in perfectly, at least. And so I would just say, from an application standpoint, but really just a practicing artist standpoint, own that, lean into it, and just be yourself. And that will come through in a blind jury artistic situation.
I have a follow-up question with that. So we've interviewed folks about art markets in the past or that have had experience with them. And I don't know how this one applies to Artsplosure. So some of them will say, and other artists give this advice too, they'll say, if you have 5 different styles, put all of them in the application because you don't know what order the images will be in. And they may like one thing, but not the others. And then I've also talked to artists that are like, no, 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 you want cohesive. Pick one thing, pick at least they can be different things as long as they talk to each other. So Artsplosure, tell me.
I wish I knew the answer to that, but it's again, this jury changes every time, so that's really
It depends.
as much of a question as if I posed it to you of like, which would you prefer? You might not say the same thing. I love, obviously, I'm like half good at a lot of things, so I like that diversity, but I also can acknowledge that cohesion is very visually pleasing. So I don't know what's how to answer.
Okay. Hey, no, that's a fair answer. That's a fair answer because you're right. It will depend on the jury, but it was worth asking.
And
Now,
then
is there anything you've seen an applicant do that you're like, you're out now?
Oh no, and to be totally honest with you, my role here is completely removed from that.
That's
Uh,
fine.
so I guess, but I guess to your point with the photo question again, that would be part of being authentic to yourself. Is like, well, which one do I like better? And at least you'll know that you did that. You weren't catering to someone else. You were staying true to yourself.
That's
Yeah.
true. As artists, that's ultimately what we need to lean on. Like, as long as you can rest easy and know that you put your best foot forward, and that's all you can hope for. And
That's
of course, Artsplosure is in May, but when would the applications open, even if it's general for artists who are maybe falling in love with this event by hearing you talk about it and they want to apply for future Artsplosures? What does that timeline look like?
so my understanding of it. I know that we are notifying artists late in the year before whatever festival we're talking about. So for 2023, I will need to double check this because again, this is Hannah is the queen of the art market, but um I that opens in like November, December 2022. So
Awesome.
but then the applications stay open for a certain amount of time. But
That
yeah,
makes
Yeah,
sense.
this
Yeah.
last one I just checked, it closed in February.
yeah.
This
Okay.
last one
So,
to give folks an idea.
and with a big asterisk, these dates may change for future Artsplosures and timelines.
Fun
Not end all
2024.
be all, but this isn't the type of event where you're applying 3 weeks before at the time of
Uh,
the
no, and it's so interesting because I guess it's fair to say we're the only event that's quite like this around here, but there's a similar one in DC and Florida, and there's a season for this. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm from Baltimore, so they have a huge one in downtown Baltimore. I'm like, "They have one here too? It's awesome."
exactly, and so there is an element of it too where if one of you applied to that, but then you might get accepted to another show the same weekend. And so there's also that element that Hannah really coordinates where she has to say, okay, you've been selected, but some people may be like, I'm going to Sedona, like I'm going to go do that one. And so then it's back to kind of a wait list that we keep. And so it is over 400 applicants, but that's still like a 25% chance. So, and there is that wait list. So you just, apply, put your hat in the ring and stay true to yourself and see what happens.
Love it. Love it.
Love it. So with that, one of the questions we like to ask everyone, Cameron, is how do you define success as an artist?
As an artist, oh gosh,
Mhm.
I mean, that's a pretty similar answer in some ways to what I just said. But I get, for me, I equate sort of success and satisfaction. Kind of what you just said, Jackie, where it's like, can you go to bed at night and like, and be proud of what you did. But that's my one word answer. But as a practicing artist, as someone that's a connector for artists to projects, I this is kind of cheesy, and I can't remember where I heard it, but I semi recently heard this thing that was like, there's only two people that you need to bother impressing, and that's 10-year-old you and 100-year-old you. And the way I know that's cheesy, but the way I have like locked that in and been like, that's right. Like that is so I would say with that rationale, that is success. It is not quantifiable of how many pieces you sell. It's if you are satisfied and you're proud of yourself and you know the little version of yourself is and that the old version of yourself will tell the stories about it. That's the vibe. That's the vibe.
Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that, and I think about that all the time too. I heard that quote. I couldn't tell you where I heard it from, but it definitely puts a lot of things into perspective, especially as entrepreneurs, as artists, as individuals in arts administration. It's one of those, there are the long days, the days where you're like, I can't catch a break, I can't win, like this email is never ending. But you're like, 10-year-old would be so freaking excited about what I'm doing right now. Like, I get to be in charge of planning this huge citywide art event and highlight the voices of other artists and also play my guitar and do this and do that. Like, what? Like, it's
Yeah.
having those moments of just like sitting down and having a moment. It's so, so awesome.
Where you're like, I do this for a living. Like
Yeah.
this is my job.
Yeah.
There's a lot of jobs in the world, and somehow my job is to basically give artists cool opportunities, create a vibe that people will like, and I get paid to do that. And but it's so true because there is a hustle, there is that art industry, and sometimes that can seem so tempting. And there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of that and being a part of that. But yeah, it's I, I can't really articulate it exactly, but it's just making yourself proud. And then I think there's also an element too of like being the person that you would have wanted, or that that as an artist, a person you would have valued or that would have helped you, and kind of doing that for other people. Or at least that's kind of what I try to do, is be that person. But I find myself occasionally where you're just like, oh my God, I've got to like build those mural frames for Greenville, and then I gotta like, oh, I gotta do that proposal for that other thing, and I have all these emails, and then I'm like, Cameron, shut up. Like, you again, you could. I've had those jobs. I've had the bad jobs, and so it's like I I catch myself in those moments and try to bring it back and remind myself what I do, and I'm gonna keep doing it until it's not fun anymore, And
Mhm,
I don't think that'll
mhm.
ever be the case, but I've turned down a lot of like corporate commercial gigs that would pay more, that would do all of those things, but that's that is not
Absolutely.
my heart hierarchy of requirements.
I love it. I absolutely love that. There's so many tie-ins, so many rabbit holes we could go down on. There's one story I do want to share with you guys though, that you just reminded me of. And it was I used to have a coworker who had a post-it note on her cubicle. Yes, this is back in corporate finance days. Um, and had a Sharpie drawn rocking chair. Just mysteriously, just a little sketch, nothing fancy, always hanging on the cubicle. And when we moved office spaces, she brought the dang thing and like posted it up again. And I was like, I need to know what this is all about. Like, there's so much mystery surrounding this thing. And then she said she learned it from her karate sensei and basically said, no matter what happens in your life and the ups and downs that you go through, just remind yourself when you're that old person sitting on that front porch in your rocking chair, maybe you have some grandkids or nieces and nephews, or maybe it's the neighbor's kid who are listening to your stories. Think about those things that made you happiest throughout your life and leave the drama behind. It was like just the highlights are like the important bits, but it was essentially like live your life, live your best life. I love that expression. It was essentially that, but it was like that was what the little rocking chair was for. Is like when you get there, then you can look back. So that what you just said about the 10 and 100, I'm like, it just brought me right back to that one. Oh, I just can't.
I'm like, okay, time out, cry.
I know. Pause the podcast, have your good cry session, and then come back for our last couple questions.
That's wow, I love that. I have a I mean, no one's heard these songs, but I have a song that I play for myself in my bedroom, basically. But that has that kind of rocking chair element about how like one day you'll be the person in that rocking chair reflecting on all the good times. And yeah, so it's like I, a perfect example is also, I mean, there is I'm not necessarily an advocate of say yes to everything, because I have done that, and don't do that. That's I dig where they're coming from, but if you've ever actually done that, you end up tired, and there's a happy medium. But you know, Canada, I'm going to connect all this. Canada is a really incredible country in terms of supporting artists, and the Canadian government spends a lot of money and spends a lot of time to make sure that Canadian artists are known outside of Canada. And I bring this up because there is they basically invite me to these conferences so that they can show me Canada from an artist's perspective and introduce me to all of these performing artists. And this is kind of a silly example, but they have one of those coming up, and it's like 3 weeks before exposure. But it's in this beautiful place in Nova Scotia, and it'll be the second time I've done that. And I found myself being like, I don't know that I've got time for that. Like, that's crunch time month. I don't know. And then I'm like, is 100-year-old you going to be like, I'm sorry, you got invited to Canada for free to see artists, and you didn't feel like going? Like, we'll be a little tired, but
A little
I'm
tired.
going. And so they called me, and I was like, I'm sorry, I was wishy-washy. I'm coming. Book the ticket. And it's again happy medium of saying yes and no. But I do.
Yeah, there's definitely that difference of saying no out of fear or hesitation, but also understanding your work capacity as well. Of like,
Mhm.
don't do an morning market and an afternoon market on the same day if they're across city from each other. Like logistically, that's not going to work. Having like multiple exhibitions, like back to back to back to back, and if they overlap, like there are logistics issues,
Mm.
but also amazing opportunities are great.
But and I won't speak for y'all, but I imagine this might be the case. Boy, do we all learn that the hard way. The
Yep.
overcommit yourself, and then I'd say it probably took like 10 times of me doing that, where I'm like, I spread myself too thin. I am like my last priority right now because I've made a lot of promises and I have to deliver on them. And about 10 times you're like, I'm never doing that. That was too much. But you really do have to find where that space is. And that's a moving target too. That's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah, that's a whole sustainability conversation, which we also talk
Mhm.
about a good bit on the podcast. But kind of thinking back maybe to your 10-year-old self or slightly older than 10 years old, what is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
ooh, oh man, that's a good question. Okay, okay. Um, while I think of that answer, I will say to other people, because clearly I know this, um, I will say to other people that are interested in practicing the arts as a career or doing what I do in the sort of administrative role, just period, that like that is a job. That is a career. You can those exist. You know, we grow up and it's like marine biologist and doctor and lawyer. It's like, no, they're art art jobs exist. You're not wasting your time. Anybody that tells you, oh my God, you're like going to school for art, or in my case, you're going to school for writing and rhetoric and English, like what are you going to do with that? Write emails for an arts organization. But
Okay.
tell me the question one more time.
What is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Okay, I got it. Um, that most likely every amazing project that you do, there's going to be a moment about a third of the way into it, maybe like 2/3 of the way into it, where you're going to hate it and be like, I have wasted my time. This this is bad. I am bad at this. Why am I doing this? Why did this person give me this creative opportunity? Because this is I don't know what the cursing rules are on the podcast, but like you know what I mean? That is normal. Being like in that it's going to get a little worse before it gets better stage is normal, and your art does not suck and you do not suck. That is a pivotal part of the creative process, and that's usually when you're kind of down in the depths of that. Sometimes that's when like the best ideas happen, and that's what makes that project one of the best things that you do. But that and art doesn't make itself, and that you've got to figure out um, finding the time to do it, because you can have this is me talking to myself mostly, but it's like you can have all the good ideas in the world, but if you don't set aside the time to do it and commit to doing it, that's all they're ever going to be is ideas. So I guess that's my answer. My two-part answer.
Resonating. Resonating with this so hard. It's not even funny. That oh my goodness, that is absolute, absolute gold right there. Can't even
But
add anything to that. It's just so
that's
good. So
that's
good.
one thing that's great about this job is that I do have a lot of ideas and I'm never going to have enough time. But what's amazing is I can be like, here's a vague idea. Other artists, would you be interested in implementing this idea and putting like your touch on this? And so then I kind of get to see an idea that I would have never been able to do. And I'm able to give an artist an opportunity to do their interpretation of that idea.
It's a win-win. I love it.
Now, if someone were to randomly hand you $100, what would you splurge it on or invest in? Has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Oh my God. It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to art. I'm thinking about the fact this is I'm not really this girl, but I am a little bit this girl. My first thought was that this morning I was typing vintage in my phone, and the the smart keyboard that is like this is what you usually type after the next word was Gucci. And I was like, damn, the
The
pressure.
algorithm always knows. They know things about us we don't know yet.
And I'm like, would a vintage Gucci briefcase be work related? Because it would bring me joy.
Oh yeah.
Particularly a materialistic person. I would say it's $100. I just get to blow them whatever. I would buy every color of those really nice. You know what I'm talking about? When
Oh
you go,
yeah, the nice pens.
oh, those are $17 each. Okay, I would get every one. I would do art with them, and I would do like frivolous things with them, like keep my to-do list with them. There's a good pen. Like I could go on. I won't, but I could. You know, there's
The
just
admin will be perfection.
exactly.
I
Art
love
material. We're here for it.
I'll just have them all lined up on my desk. Like, yeah,
I
yeah,
did that.
I live like this.
I love it. Well, Cameron, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Real quick before you go, how can listeners stay in contact with you after they listen to today's episode?
Well, you can email me, and
She'll respond in 3 weeks. It'll be fine.
yeah, I'll get back to you in 30 to 60 business days probably because golly. So you can email me at Cameron@artsplosure.org. You can find me on Instagram at miss.ms.unsuitablepets. That's my personal Instagram. I'm as bad at DMs as I am at email, but or you can just find me on the street in downtown Raleigh. That's where our offices are. And I'm always finding an excuse to be walking around. So, yeah, there's your 3
Track her
options.
down at Artsplosure.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to link all those things in the show notes. And Cameron, would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can share advice on keeping track of opportunities on a bonus segment for our podcast supporters?
Let's do it. That sounds great.
Awesome. So for our listeners, if you want to become a podcast supporter, head on over to levelupartist.com to find out how you too can support the podcast.
And if you want to stay connected with us between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artist on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.